This time on Ozark Garage, we're talking all about cheap off-road shocks, how to mount them correctly, and building custom mounts for our Truggy. Stick around and check it out. Welcome to Ozark Garage. Follow along as I fabricate, modify, restore, and drive interesting projects. Stick around, see what's next. Welcome back, everyone. We're still working on the Truggy, and today we're talking about my favorite off-road shocks. If you haven't guessed yet by the color, they're a Monroe Gas Magnum, available almost everywhere. So they're my favorite shock for three different reasons. So first of all, they're cheap. I bought these online, and after shipping, they're only about $37 each, which means you can smash them into the rocks, and they're just disposable. The second reason is they've got pretty good travel for an inexpensive shock. These are listed at just over 11 inches, which isn't enough to win you the King of the Hammers or Baja 500 or anything like that, but if you're building that level of a rig, you're not shopping for a $37 shock anyway. 11 inches of travel is enough to unseat these stock TJ coils at full flex, and any more than the 11 inches would bind these Johnny joints in my links, so 11 inches is perfectly adequate for this rig. The third reason is they're pretty easy to mount. The upper and lower mounts on these shocks have just a 5/8 inch eye. The factory application for this shock had 5/8 studs on the U-bolt plate and on the upper shock mount. Me, I try to keep things simple and just use a 5/8 bolt welded to the axle housing and then some tabs up top. The shock I'm replacing this with was also a Monroe shock. This one is just the standard Blue Series truck shock. I painted it black. I'll paint these ones black also because I like the murdered out look, and I'm not sponsored by McDonald's, but I could be for the right price. So if you're listening, McDonald's, hit me up, let's talk. The standard Blue Series shock has a smaller shaft, smaller bore, smaller piston, smaller reservoir, smaller everything, which I originally chose because I figured the smaller shock would be a better fit for the lightweight vehicle, and I needed clearance from the tire, as you can see by the missing black paint here. It also had a full-length dust cover like this one, but I cut them off for additional clearance for the tire, and in the front, I cut them off so that I can zip tie the brake lines to the shock body to keep them out of the way. There's been a few times where I've bottomed out the suspension on the bump stops, so I'm going with a larger shock to alleviate that issue, hopefully. I'm going to finish up a few measurements here, and then I'm going to cut out a set of mounts on the plasma table. Let's get to it. So you might be asking yourself why I'm even bothering to mount the shocks in this space again with all the tire clearance issues. Why not move the upper mount in farther? Why not move the whole shock elsewhere? Or maybe you're asking, why do shocks even matter? You may have heard the term dampener as another name for a shock, and really that's the purpose. It's to dampen the oscillations of the spring. Without shocks, the vehicle and suspension will bounce around uncontrollably and the tires won't have any traction. Generally speaking, you want the shocks to have as much control over the suspension as possible. To achieve that control, there are two main guidelines when mounting these shocks. Number one, mount them as close to the tire as possible. The axle or control arm will act as a lever, so the closer the shock is mounted to the tire, the more force it can exert, and therefore has more control. I drew up this diagram on the Truggy with some rough measurements, and if I'd mounted the shocks on the inside of the frame rails on the Truggy, the shock would have about 18% less leverage on the tire. And if you're liking this video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with your friends. The second guideline for mounting shocks is to mount them as vertically as possible. The more the shock is angled, the less effective its dampening becomes. If the shock is mounted at 80 degrees, you only see a 2% reduction in dampening, but 60 degrees results in a 14% loss, and 45 degrees results in a full 30% loss in dampening. You can actually calculate the reduction in dampening by calculating the sine of the mounting angle. Needless to say, these are perfect scenarios. Sometimes you just have to mount them where space allows, like in my Lotus 7 replica. Anyway, that's it for this time. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check back as we continue working on the Truggy.